I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and when I was 3, I moved to Santa Barbara, California, and I'm an only child. My father owned a healthcare consulting firm, and I had a relatively normal childhood. My parents found out that I had ADD when I was 5. It was pretty debilitating. Like, I learned how to read and write a lot longer than my peer. It took me a lot longer to learn how to read and write than my peers, and my parents put me on Ritalin when I was 5 and Adderall shortly thereafter. So I was on amphetamine salts when I was in first and second grade. By the time I got into high school, I started experimenting with illicit narcotics, PG-13 drugs, marijuana, ecstasy, LSD. I got expelled from 3 high schools within the span of a month, and I spent most of my teenage years in programs for troubled adolescents. They sent me to wilderness programs. They sent me to residential treatment centers in Utah. And I had some writing published when I was a teenager, so I got into a program outside of Boston for writing. It was a writing internship program. Right away when I got out there, they would give you an $80 stipend, which was like an allowance. And I started going into the ghettos to buy heroin. I was snorting it back then, and I learned very quickly the place where I could go score it on the street. One day I went out there, and the normal people that were selling it weren't around. There was a black guy out there that I'd never seen before. And I went up to him and asked him if he knew where I could get heroin. He had me follow him into an abandoned building. There were plywood for the windows. And when we got in there, we got to a stairwell. He asked me how much I wanted. I wanted $80 worth. His eyes were red. It looked like he was hopped up on something like crack or PCP. And he pulled out a gun, and he accused me of being a cop. He was shaking the gun at me. It was the first time a gun had ever been pointed at me. I told him I wasn't a cop, that I was basically a college student, and that I just snorted heroin. And he told me he wanted me to shoot up in front of him to prove that I wasn't a cop. I'd never shot up in my life. I had a phobia of needles at that point. And he pulled a worn and aged syringe out of his sock. And he forced me to shoot up at gunpoint. Now, I didn't know how to do it, so he just told me to put my arm out. I looked away, and he shot me up for the first time. That was a very definitive moment for me. That was a big milestone in my life, as far as, if I look back in retrospect, if I could pinpoint one moment that things started to go downhill very, very quickly, it was right when the needle was introduced. For a while, I didn't even know how to shoot up. There was no YouTube back then. You couldn't just Google how to do it. I would just stick the needle in my arm. I wouldn't even find a vein, so I had these lumps. Eventually, I learned how to do it, and I became an IV heroin addict. I got expelled from that program, and I came back to California. Abortions with different girlfriends, in and out of jail. I was homeless for a while, and I got a job brokering media for Spike TV. If you remember those shows, Wildest Moments Caught on Tape, what I would do is I would find crazy footage of like car chases or armed robberies. I would buy them non-exclusively and sell them to Spike TV. And I became an associate producer. But what happened is my drug habit started going up to a gargantuan level. No drug dealers in Santa Barbara, where I was living, could even keep up with me anymore. So I had to come down to LA to buy heroin just to sustain my habit. And I started selling drugs on a pretty major level. I was selling kilos every week. I was selling kilos of MDMA, cocaine, and eventually heroin, because the dealers that I had in Santa Barbara couldn't even keep up with me. So it got to a point where I was making about $10,000 a week from selling heroin. I would come down to East LA, and the woman that I was getting it from ended up getting caught by the feds. I didn't know that. Unbeknownst to me, she had caught in a federal case. She'd gotten caught with a kilo. And in popular culture, you see the junkie get caught and tell on the dealer. On a federal indictment, they usually have a target at the very top. So they do these big RICO or conspiracy cases. I got caught up in a conspiracy case, and she had told on about 40 people. So I had 65 co-defendants on the first indictment, I think 105 on the superseding indictment. And I came down to East LA to get my normal batch of heroin. I was getting 1 pound to 2 pounds every week. And when I met up with my connection, to a Hispanic lady, she looked at me and she said, "You're gonna be okay, mijo." And there was a tear coming out of her eye. I knew right there and then that she set me up. Grabbed the bag, went back into the car to the girl that had brought me down there, and she was sick. She was going through heroin withdrawal at the time, and she was crying. She told me that I had to get her well. I knew that we were busted, and I was trying to hurry her up, but she insisted that I shoot her up or she wasn't going to continue to drive the car. So I was giving her a shot, and she said, "Cops." And we looked, and we were completely surrounded. There's probably 40 or 50 cops surrounding the car. They had guns out. One of them kept yelling, "We're dead, we're dead." And we didn't know what that meant. DEAD was an acronym for Drug Enforcement Agency Detective. But they kept yelling, "We're dead, we're dead." I'd never seen that in movies or in TV shows. I had no idea why they kept yelling it. Later, I'd find out that that was the acronym for Drug Enforcement Agency Detective. And when I got out of the car, I had a needle in my hand. They're like, "Drop the needle." Got down on the ground, and they arrested me. That was the second time that I got caught with weight in East LA within a 48-hour period. The first time they let me go, second time they let me go again. I had no idea why. I'd never dealt with federal authorities before. I didn't cooperate with them. I thought that it was probably a search and seizure issue. I had just never heard of somebody getting arrested with drugs and being let go. I thought it was going to go away. Plus, I was making so much money at the time, I had this delusion that I was above the law. I had $250,000 cash in my safe. I thought that if it ever came to a point where I was going to court, that I had enough money to pay my way out of it. About 4 months later, I get a phone call from a blocked number. And it says that it was a guy from the DEA, and he said, "This is so-and-so from the Drug Enforcement Agency. You've been indicted. You have two charges against you. You're facing 10 to life. You can turn yourself in, or we're going to come knock your door down." So I went and I got an attorney. This guy named Bob Sanger. He was one of Michael Jackson's attorney. Spent a lot of money retaining him. And he asked me what I want. He said, "You're dealing with federal mandatory minimums. The best you're going to do is 5 years, 5 to 40 or 10 to life. I'm going to try to get you down to the 5 to 40 bracket." My girlfriend was in the car with me the first time that I'd gotten arrested. So I said, "I'll turn myself in and you can make a deal with the feds, but make sure that she doesn't get indicted by them." So he made a deal with the DEA that I was to self-surrender down in downtown LA, right here. And they weren't going to charge my girlfriend. So I came down here thinking that if I turned myself in, they were going to do my fingerprints and I was going to get out that day, maybe the next day. I didn't see the light of day for 5 years. And what they did is the feds kept their word by not charging my girlfriend federally, but they gave the case over to the state. So the same drugs that we got caught with, they gave to the Los Angeles Sheriff Department, and they charged her with it. So now she was a fugitive on the run. And I called her cell phone, her brother picked up, and she had overdosed and died. Found out that she died because she was scared as a fugitive on the run, because the feds essentially tricked us into me turning myself in, saying that she'd have immunity, which they never charged her federally, but they gave the case over to the state. Prison, obviously I was scared. Everything that I'd ever heard about prison, violence, rape, riots. These were things that were deeply embedded into my psyche. And I remember being petrified to go to prison. I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I saw people stabbed in there. The most violent thing that I ever saw is I saw somebody pour burning hot baby oil on somebody's eye, and their eyeball came out. They had put in the microwave a thing of baby oil in a plastic cup until it got boiling hot. The guy was sitting down playing cards. The guy tapped him on the shoulder and poured this thing of boiling hot baby oil on his face, and his eyeball came out. I still have nightmares to this day of this hellacious scream. It was this wail that you never forget if you hear somebody that's endured that kind of violence in real life. Growing up in the upper middle class in Santa Barbara, violence was something that was abstracted to me. I remember when I started seeing people stabbed in real life, it looked fake. It looked like something you'd see in a movie. blood would spray out. Somebody would stab somebody and hit their artery. Blood would spray out, and you'd think that it wasn't real, but it was actually happening. And while I was in prison, I'm not an inherently violent person, so I try to stay out of the way. I decided that before I'd gotten into drugs and gotten into trouble, I was going to be a writer. So I started writing a book. And I kind of clung on to that obsession. I was going to perfect my craft while I was in there. And I was going to work every day to write a book over and over again until I had it right. And I was going to put out a novel, and this novel was going to change my life. And that is what got me through federal prison. I got out in 2013 after serving 5 years. Got my book published. It was called Wasting Talent. And it really did bring me the life that I thought it would. I started touring, I started meeting celebrities, started getting a following, and I ended up getting sober for 3 years when I got out of prison. I relapsed in 2015. And when I had relapsed, I'd been totally sober for 3 years. My life didn't have the drama associated with it when I was in active addiction. Seemed like I had everything going for me at the time. I thought I could do acid in recovery. I thought that because I was a writer, I was a creative type, I could do LSD, and it wasn't an addictive drug like heroin. Within a week, I had a needle in my arm again. My fiance had left me, and I lost everything. I lost my condo in LA. Within 1 week, I lost everything that I had. I ended up marrying a fan. I got a fan letter from a woman that lived in Denver. She said she was a big fan of my book, and she wanted to meet me. Flew her out to LA because I just sold the French rights to my book. I'd come up on a lump sum of money at the time. We knew each other for a week and we got married, had a horrible, tumultuous marriage for a year. I was doing heroin the entire time, and I was drinking 2 fists of whiskey a day. It's kind of lighting the fuse at both ends. And that culminated with me getting arrested for a DUI. I got in a car accident, but I wasn't drunk. I was actually dope sick. So the cops knew that there was something wrong with me. They charged me with driving under the influence. I beat it in the state, but since I was on federal probation, they decided to send me back to prison for 3 months. I lost everything again. In that 3-month period, I lost my apartment, my wife left me, I lost my vehicle. I got out and I moved back in with my parents in Santa Barbara. I was 31 years old. I didn't have a car. I was living with my parents. My book royalties were running thin at that point, and I started going to AA meetings because I wanted to better myself. I ended up meeting a girl at an AA meeting. She was like 5 years younger than me, and her and I had a platonic relationship. She told me that she just wanted to hang out with somebody that was sober. We went to the beach together one day, and she told me that she was an escort, and she asked me how I felt about it. This was not my girlfriend, so I'm a pretty non-judgmental person. I said, as long as you're safe, we're just friends. I don't care what you do for a living. She called me about a week later and asked me if I could hook her up with a sugar daddy type relationship. I was 31 years old at the time. I was like, I don't know people like that. That's probably like an older age demographic than the kind of people I hang out with. But she told me she was getting kicked out of her place and she really needed me to hook her up with somebody. Coincidentally, couple days after that, somebody asked me for heroin. I was clean at the time, but I was doing someone a favor by getting it for them. I went and I met up with my heroin dealer. He asked me if I knew any escorts. He said that he drove Uber, and one of his main clients was this guy that was in an unhappy marriage, and he wanted kind of a sugar daddy type situation with an escort. I told the girl about it because she had been getting raped, beaten on back pages. She wanted a safe arrangement. Told her about it. She asked me if I could introduce her to this guy. The drug dealer gave the guy my phone number. He called me. I set it up for her. I wasn't making any money off of it. I was just trying to put her in a better situation. And she asked me to go with her to the motel. Turned out that we got set up. There were 6 cops there, 6 sheriffs. They had shotguns in our face. The drug dealer had set us up. And they asked the girl what my role was in this situation. And she said, oh, that's my friend Ryan. He just got out of prison. I'm trying to make him money, which wasn't true. I don't know why she told them that, but because of that statement, I got charged with pimping and pandering. Now, I was on federal probation already for the conspiracy case. It turned out that the girl that I was buying heroin from back when I caught my original Fed case was connected to a drug cartel called the Mendoza Clan. Because it was such a high profile cartel case, they kept me on supervised probation for 4 years. So I was still on supervised probation for 4 years when I caught the pimping and pandering case. And they were putting a lot of pressure on me to take a conviction. A week after I caught that case, I sold the film rights to my book. A couple days after that, my current partner, who I've been with 5 years, I got pregnant. So I was out on bail, just got a film deal for my book, and my girlfriend was pregnant, and it was almost unequivocally certain that I was going to miss the birth of my first kid. My friend had written the screenplay for Fight Club, for David Fincher's Fight Club, and he told me that he really liked my life story, the chaos of it, the mayhem. He thought it would make a good documentary. So then a documentary about my life went into production. So all of these things happened at the same time. It was this confluence of a lot of really positive and a lot of really negative things. And I just had a complete mental breakdown. You know, I stopped sleeping. I'd stay up for 10 days at a time. I went into the psychosis. And eventually, I started acting so erratically. I was calling the FBI, telling them that my parole officer was trying to kill me because I honestly thought that. I got so paranoid that the feds were after me that I started having these like really public freakouts. My PO didn't know what to do, and he issued a warrant for my arrest just to try to keep me safe because they thought that I was a danger to myself or the community. And I went back to prison. I served 16 months, missed the birth of my first son. I got out 16 months later, and that last term was the worst term that I'd been in. I got in 9 riots in the course of 16 months. I got 8 stitches, 3 broken ribs. It was a nightmarish term. But the worst part of that was missing the birth of my son. You know, I'd much rather endure physical pain than have to miss the birth of another kid. That literally felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. And when I got out, I had nothing left. The documentary had been put on hold. My book sales were down. I got out and I tried to start, working conventional jobs. I went and I was working as a telemarketer. I was on welfare. It was to the point where the only way I could support my family was I was going to churches to go to food banks so I could get canned goods just to be able to feed my 1-year-old and my fiance. At the end, I was working at this telemarketing place, and my manager was probably like 4 years older than me. So I'm like 33 at this point, and he yelled at me because I didn't ask permission to smoke a cigarette. And I looked at him, and I just couldn't be talked to that way. I valued myself more than that. And I quit. I walked out of there, and I remember I called my fiance and told her that I quit. I said, I have a higher purpose in life than this. My fiance is like, we're counting on that. We're paycheck to paycheck. In fact, we're in a deficit below that. We have to have those paychecks just to keep the electricity on and to feed our kids. And I said, I just have a feeling everything's going to be okay. 10 minutes later, 2 things happened to me. The first is I got a phone call from one of my friends, and he said that someone wanted to meet me. It was a very high profile person. Gave me a lot of confidence knowing, the person presented is like an A-list actor, and this guy presented himself as a fan of my work. And the second thing was I got asked to be on a podcast. And that podcast, from just going on that one podcast and getting enough views, I was able to create my own platforms, create my own following, and I never worked for another person again. We had another kid, and somewhere in that time, I got sober for good. And now I'm sitting here sober talking to you. A lot of people ask me why they think that I went through as much as I did, considering that I come from a background without abuse, upper middle class family. My parents put me on Ritalin and Adderall when I was 5. I don't blame them for that because that was per the recommendation of healthcare professionals. This is when ADD had a rampant diagnosis. It was very pervasive in the early 90s. But what I think happened is neurologically, being put in amphetamines when I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, it gave my neurology this insatiable appetite for narcotics. By the time I was 15, it seemed like when I started doing illicit drugs, it was something that I'd been missing the entire time. I don't blame my parents for that, but I would certainly ask that if there's other parents in similar situations, having healthcare professionals recommend medications, to think about it, because there might be long-term implications for those medications.
So when you were on the streets and you're heavy in your drug use, you must have seen some crazy shit, right?
Yeah, when I was 19, I had been kicked out of my parents' house, and I was on probation at the time for drug possession. Back in that time period, if you got a dirty drug test, they'd give you 30 days. Then you get out. You get another drug test, you get 60 days. And it would go up incrementally like that, 30, 60, 90. They were trying to give me 6 months in jail. Now, I was fully addicted to heroin at this point, and I went to court for them to remand me into custody. I knew that was a possibility, that the judge might tell the bailiff, all right, we're remanding Mr. Leone into custody. And when they said that, I was sweating, and I remember just feeling the impending sense of withdrawal. I knew that I was going to be very dope sick in jail. And I just got up in court and ran out of the courtroom while the bailiff was chasing me. My parents were petrified that they were harboring a fugitive at this point, so they wouldn't let me live with them. They basically said, go turn yourself in for 6 months in jail, or you can't stay here anymore. So I basically became homeless willingly because I was too scared to go kick heroin cold turkey in jail. While I was homeless, I met this guy named Pablo. It was probably like in his early 30s, and he was a drug dealer. And he said I could live with him as long as I would be the runner for him. I'd go deliver drugs for him, give me a place to stay. He was in this tumultuous relationship with his girlfriend. They were always fighting, throwing, dishes at each other, smashing everywhere. It was a very uncomfortable place to live. So I tried to be out of that house as much as possible. One day they had me go to the needle exchange to pick up clean syringes because they sold heroin, they sold speed, and they would always give clean syringes and tourniquets, cottons, whatever, to their customers. So I go to the needle exchange. Back in that time period, it was very clandestine because it was still illegal at that point. There were some humanitarian, health advocates that would do these underground needle exchange programs. It's early 2000s. So I go get the clean needles. They give it to you in this brown lunch bag. And as I'm leaving the exchange, I see a girl that I used to know that's a stripper. She asked me if I have any heroin. She looks up at me, and through this collage of mascara, she'd been crying. I recognized her. She's pregnant at the time. She told me that being dope sick is worse for the unborn child than actually doing heroin itself. I'm dope sick too at the time. And I had a drug dealer that lived a couple blocks from there. The guy that I was living with, I would have had to take a bus an hour south. So I would have gotten something sooner if I brought this girl with me to the drug dealer's house that lived by the exchange. So I was like, yeah, we can go. It's a couple blocks away. Morally, at this point, drug addiction just completely skewed my moral compass. I don't even know if I had one at the time. I'm literally just on survival instincts, get more drugs, that's it. I'm not thinking about what it means to get a pregnant girl drugs. I'm just thinking about sustaining my own habit. We get to the house. Now I already owed the guy $60 or something. I was like, all right, let me get the money. She pulls out this yellow and blue money. I'm like, what is that? It was foreign currency. She's like, it's Korean. I'm like, he's not gonna take Korean money. And she's like, just see if, it'll convert to $100. I already owed the guy money. I knew he was gonna say no. So I go and I knock on the door. There's these Nazi skinhead guys, swastikas on their neck. And as soon as they see me, they're like, hey, do you have the $60 you owe me? I was like, I have $100 in Korean money. And they took it out of my hand and ripped it up. And they told me to get out of here. Get out of here, junkie. So I end up going back to the girl that had given me the Korean money to begin with. She's crying, hysterical. I'm like, I told you they weren't going to give me something. She's like, and she goes, well, suck their dick. Again, moral compass is skewed. I'm not thinking she's pregnant. This is like even going further down on the moral compass. So I go back and I'm like, hey, okay, she'll suck your dick. And they're like, is she good looking? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, she's a stripper. I don't tell them that she's pregnant. So I bring her back, and one of the guys had just gotten out of prison. So he wanted her to give him a blowjob. So I go in with them. She goes with this other guy into this room. They kind of make a comment about her being pregnant, sitting on the couch and kind of just waiting while she's doing whatever she's doing. The guy that is inside the house is smoking meth. He asks me if I want any. I don't even want any. I'm just a heroin addict at that point. I didn't like meth. And all of a sudden, the guy runs out of the room and he's complaining, saying that, she was scraping, wasn't doing a good job. And she's like, let's get out of here. And the guy that I was with that was smoking meth goes in the room where they were and realizes that some of his dope is missing. So he wants to strip search us. And we get in this verbal altercation. I'm like, you're not strip searching us. We're out of here. We leave. Girl pulls a few grams out of her pocket, and she's like, or out of her bra. She's like, hey, I stole the dope. But I'd left the bag of needles in the house. So I tell her this. I'm like, well, I left the bag of needles in the house. And at that point, there was no way we could get other needles because the needle exchange program is only open at specific hours. I had tried to break into this guy's house before. He had this window in the backyard with this stack of plywood leading up to it. It's like logs and plywood. And my friend and I had broken the latch off because we had planned on robbing this guy. So I knew theoretically I could crawl up the log pile, get into the bathroom, let myself down, crawl military style, and it was possible that I could grab the bag of needles without being seen, get back out, and we'd have the dope and the needles. There was also a very good chance that they'd figure it out. But I was willing to take that risk because I was dope sick and I wasn't thinking. So I go up this pile, I lower myself down, military style on the bathroom floor. I open the door slowly. I can see their legs dangling on the couch and I can see the bag of needles. It's like in my scope of vision. I know that I can grab it without being caught. So I crawl military style. I'm slithering to the bag. Grab it. I have to do a 180 on my stomach. And all of a sudden, I hear Pink Floyd's Money. It's my ringtone on my cell phone going off right as I'm leaving. It was very quick what happened after that. But they figured out that I was in there, throw me up against a wall. One of them punched me in the face, broke my nose. So my eyes were watering. I could barely see anything. All I could see was a butterfly knife getting sliced towards me. And somehow I broke myself free before they could stab me. There's these concrete steps that go from the front door to this gravel driveway. And I jumped. And they were running right behind me and they jumped as well. And the guy dropped the knife. The guy that had the knife slipped when he jumped because I just jumped and happened to get down onto the gravel. When he did it, he fell. Knife kind of just tumbled. So I'm looking at the knife, he's looking at the knife, and it was like whoever grabbed it first. I grabbed the knife before he did. And he's just kind of looking at me like a deer in headlights. And I stabbed him right above the kneecap because I felt I had to. I felt if I hadn't done that he was going to get me. And the girl that was with me is just standing there. She's in shock too. This guy is literally just there's blood coming out of above his knee. It was very, very gory, very bloody. And it seemed like everything was in slow motion. It almost seemed like the volume was down. I remember sticking the needle in. It felt like puncturing a pumpkin. It was really soft, and then it went like thud right at the bone. And I just remember what that feeling felt like. It's not what I would have pictured stabbing someone would feel like. I'd never done anything close to that violent in my life. I think I maybe have been in a couple fist fights. It's not something I felt good about. Again, it was more survival instinct. and I ended up getting the knife and I just threw it over the fence. Went away. I was wearing a wife beater. It was covered in blood. And instead of like getting out of that area, we went into a Taco Bell bathroom, maybe a half a block from there, and we went and shot the dope that we stole. No moral compass to be found.
What is it about drugs that change a person's moral compass? I mean, because you come from a good family, right?
Come from a good family, no violence.
You don't
no
have all the
abuse.
trauma that a lot of people I interview have had. You just got caught up in drugs, and that becomes an addiction. Then your life goes haywire, right?
Yeah,
But the moral compass goes haywire as well.
Yeah, well, there's the moral compass aspect, and then there's this panic. Like if you're watching a horror movie, a lot of times in a horror film, they use the device of sound, where like when something's crescendoing, it's like, and it's like this like panic, it's like this like amplified sense of panic. That's what being dope sick feels like. So when you're in that kind of palpable anxiety where you can hear sirens going off, you're literally willing to do whatever you have to do to get out of that state of mind, because it's so terrifying. It's all encompassing, and it's almost suffocating.
Interesting. What have you learned from all of your debauchery and craziness?
I didn't learn,
because you seem very stable and level-headed right now.
I don't think I started learning until I had kids, because I think that they gave my life purpose. So before, it was like I'd been stripped down to like those primal instincts of just survival. And survival for me had been mutated to fill this drug addiction. It was like part of my survival, just as a normal human being would have to satiate hunger. I had to satiate this particular appetite. Once I had kids, I learned that it wasn't about me anymore. I was secondary, and my obligation as a human being was to provide as a parent, not just financially, but morally as well. So when you talk about a moral compass being skewed or going away entirely, once I had children, I started being conscientious of that moral compass again. And it kind of gave me direction. It was a beacon towards a moral standpoint that I wanted to achieve, to be a good example to my kids. And that's ultimately what was transformative for me. That's what finally clicked, was having to be held accountable by kids that are essentially blameless in the entire thing. I want to stop the cycle right now.
That's great to hear. Awesome. Ryan, thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
That was great. Thank you.